Hey, how's it going, YouTube? I have been meaning to do videos on basically everything in the past few weeks, from 3D crosspoint technology to GPUs, upcoming, volatile memory types of graphics memory, such as HBM2, GDDR6. The Core Wars, a continuing battle between AMD and Intel in terms of processor and platform releases. But with that being said, I have actually recorded hours and hours and hours of footage, and I just don't think that putting those long of videos on YouTube for you guys is going to be something that attracts a lot of customers, so to speak. And I want you guys to be able to get some information quickly. If there's anything that you want to see me do a deep dive on, just put it in the comments below. But for this video, I'm going to try and keep it relatively short, and I just want to cover, basically just touch on the CPU market for all segments of the market. Last week I discussed, kind of the AM4 socket for AMD in the mainstream market, socket 1151 for Intel in the mainstream market. But I'm going to touch on mobile, I'm going to touch on the mainstream market, I'm going to touch on the soon-to-be released high-end desktop and Enthusiast parts from both AMD and Intel, as well as a little bit of stuff in the data center, and I'll kind of trail off with what's relevant in terms of 3D crosspoint technology right now. And I'll do another video to discuss with you guys here shortly about the upcoming fisticuffs battle between AMD with Vega and NVIDIA with the Pascal current lineup, as well as Volta in the near future. So let's get rolling. To start off, the low end, not the low end, but the low power, the low TDP, low power consumption market, really designed for laptops, all-in-one computers, thin clients, things of that nature that require CPUs, APUs, SoCs that use lower power consumption, lower TDP, lower heat. It may or may not require active cooling, etc. That market, Intel is already obviously firmly in that market. They've just recently released and kind of are getting more market adoption right now for their 7th generation Core i3, i5, i7 CPUs, which they do include the Intel integrated GPUs on there, which aren't very good for gaming, but at least can give you a display on your screen without having to have some other kind of a dedicated embedded GPU or something like that to give you some video on your display. But there's not a lot of information, because Intel did just release the 7th generation chips into the market for the mobile space, as far as what their future plans are. As far as AMD is concerned, there is some stuff coming, all of which is based on the Zen architecture, just like the entire product portfolio is going to be based off of the Zen architecture, from low power all the way into the data center and the servers. But they're going to be releasing the Great Horned Owl and the branded Kestrel CPUs and APUs, designed from like 15 to 65 watts TDP. So lower power consumption to go into, again, all-in-one PCs, small form factor, all-in-one thin clients, stuff like that. And this is one area where, even though Ryzen does have an efficiency advantage, there's just not enough a gap there in power consumption where AMD is able to squeeze more cores or more threads into these lower power consuming parts than what Intel can offer. So this is one segment of the market where we're going to see parity in the number of cores and the number of threads on offer in these mobile chips. So Intel right now, even some of the Core i7s, if in the U or the Y series, the low power, Core i7s, i5s, i3s, those are dual core chips that may or may not have 4 cores. I'm sorry, 4 threads. So have hyperthreading being enabled on those, depending on the CPU. They do have 4 core and 8 thread parts. Intel does have the HQ, which is their high performance quad core i7s in the mobile market right now. They have their HK, which is the high performance quad core unlocked, which come with appropriate TDPs and power consumption, but they can be pushed a little bit further. They are unlocked, so if you want to overclock those, you can. But they've got 4 cores and 8 threads, and what AMD will be offering with their new kind of Zen CPU-based line of CPUs and APUs in the same market segment is going to be the same. They're going to offer between 2 and 4 physical cores with SMT enabled or not. So you're going to see a maximum there of 4 cores and 8 threads on the AMD side of things as well. But it should be highly competitive. We're going to see some really good performance from AMD over and above what Intel can offer, at least in terms of the graphics. The integrated GPUs on those Intel chips really are meant just to give you a 2D display, and gaming is terrible on those integrated GPUs on the Intel platform. So hopefully we'll see some better gaming performance on the AMD mobile chips coming out to market here very soon. And there's stuff we can see in the future for AMD releasing. They've kind of, their roadmap's a little bit more clear. Of course they're going to release Zen 2, Zen Plus core mobile chips in the future, and we just don't really know what's next after Kaby Lake in terms of the mobile market for Intel, but those did just come out. So moving on from that into the mainstream space, obviously AM4 is the socket that AMD has out right now. We do have our current quad 6 and 8 core up to 16 thread R5 and R7 CPUs, which are phenomenal. The 8 core 16 thread part I have in my system right now terrorizes every workload I can possibly throw at it. So I'm super happy with that right now. Great power efficiency. I run this thing at stock to do like folding at home and stuff like that, and it consumes like 55 watts when it's being completely maxed out on all 16 threads doing like protein folding and stuff. So amazing power efficiency, and they're killing Intel right now in the mainstream market with a lot of longevity and a clear upgrade path for AM4 going from Summit Ridge, which is what's currently in these Ryzen CPUs, the first generation Zen architecture cores. We're going to have Raven Ridge APUs available very soon that use the first generation Zen core architecture on the CPU side, that also include Vega GPU cores on the same die. Should be phenomenal. And then, upgrade path for the future. Early 2018, we're going to see Pinnacle Ridge, Zen Plus, Zen 2 core CPUs available for AM4 socket. We're going to see Zen Plus, Zen 2 or 3, CPU cores with Navi APUs, which I think is, what are those things called? Greyhawk is going to be the code name for those APUs in early 2018. But as far as Intel goes, again, we really don't have any idea what is going to be the successor to socket 1151. If you guys have any information on that to substantiate and say, hey, I found this link that Intel is going to be releasing a new mainstream socket, or even additional mainstream CPUs into the current socket 1151, please link those down below. I want to get the word out on those. As far as I know, I have not seen or heard anything to indicate that Intel is going to add any additional life to that mainstream socket 1151. The current i5 7600K and 7700K i7 are pretty much the end of the story for that platform, And personally, like I say, I've looked into it. I haven't seen any information as far as what is coming next from Intel, but hopefully whatever their new platform is, it'll offer, mainstream consumers more cores, more threads, and more value to compete with AMD in what right now is just an absolute beating in terms of, a value offering, in my opinion. Now, this is something I mentioned last week, but I didn't really go into, we didn't have any details. There were rumors going around saying, AMD was going to release their own, high-end desktop Enthusiast workstation platform to compete with Intel's upcoming X299 chipset on the Socket 2066, which is going to be Intel's brand new socket and platform for Kaby Lake-x parts, which oddly enough are very similar to the Kaby Lake parts, the 7600K and the 7700K on Socket 1151, but they actually have fewer threads, less cache, and they use more power on Socket 2066 for whatever reason. But that's one way to kind of get your foot in the door in Intel's new platform, is to buy one of those lower-end Kaby Lake-x parts. But that will also support the skylake-x CPUs in 6, 8, 10, and 12 core variants, which will be Intel's highest-end part for the high-end desktop enthusiast workstation segment. Now, we knew about that already. And like I say, there were rumors last week of AMD introducing their own new socket X390, X399 chipsets, and that has actually come to be true. AMD is going to be releasing, I want to say, a cut-down version of their upcoming SP3 server socket, but in reality, it's not a cut-down version. It's the exact same physical socket. It's got 4,096 pins, I believe, that stick into that socket. And on the server side, they're introducing chips with Naples that have 32 cores, 64 threads in the exact same socket physically than what's going to be on offer in their high-end desktop, ultra enthusiast workstation market. The only difference is they're going to call it not SP3 as they are in the server space. They're going to call this socket SP3R2. So revision 2 is probably what that's nomenclature for. And the only difference that I can see between socket SP3 on the server side and socket SP3R2 for the high-end desktop space is there's a little bit less in terms of power availability. So 180 watts being available to processors that sync into SP3R2 in the high-end desktop space versus 200 watts or more being available for sockets that are going to sync into those SP3 server sockets. But AMD has got a hell of a lineup here coming out to compete with Intel in the high-end desktop workstation enthusiast space. Just as the current Ryzen CPUs use CCX units, which are basically like 4 core clusters or 4 CPU cores in a little module. That modular design allows them to scale up and scale down on CPU core count by disabling CPUs within those CCXs. And they're going to do something very similar for their server and for their high-end desktop parts. Basically, they're going to use what's called a Zeppelin module, and it's very similar to a CCX core. In fact, it's essentially 2 CCX cores, or 2 CCX modules rather, kind of strapped together. So what you get is, instead of having a 4 CPU core kind of cluster or module in a CCX unit, you have 8 CPU cores in a Zeppelin module or cluster. Now, what's going to be on offer here from AMD initially on this new SP3R2 platform using this, these new X390, 399 chipsets? They're going to offer 10 core, 12-core, 14 and 16-core Whitehaven CPUs, all of which are going to have access to 44 PCIe Express lanes just coming out of the chip itself. So that should be incredible. And the benefit, as I was getting to here with using this modular design, is if you think about it, there's 8 cores in one of those Zeppelin modules, and the lowest end Ryzen, they're going to call them R9 to compete with the Skylake-x parts from Intel. They're going to be their new i9 series of CPUs. Obviously, Intel and AMD keeps trying to kind of copycat and one-up Intel in terms of their nomenclature for their parts, and they're doing that so that there's clarity for consumers. They can kind of see which parts and which products kind of line up with one another in terms of value, performance, etc. So, but what that actually means is that if the lowest R9 is a 10-core part, they have to use 2 Zeppelin modules to get 10 cores. So they will basically disable, let's see, three cores on each Zeppelin module, and that will take it down from 16 cores to 10 cores. But the thing is, even though there's only 5 active CPUs per Zeppelin, on the low end 10-core 20-thread R9 part from AMD, that's still going to have access to the full 32 megabytes of L3 cache, just like on the R5 1600, where those have only 6 cores compared to 8 cores on the R7s. They still retain access to the full complement of 16 megabytes of L3 cache that are just built into those CCX units, just as there's 16 megabytes of L3 cache built into each Zeppelin unit, giving them a total of 32 megabytes of L3 cache, which is just across the board. Intel's offerings, depending if you're going with a 6-core, an 8-core, a 10-core, or a 12-core part on the Skylake-x platform, you're going to get, honestly, meager amounts of L3 cache that they supposedly have optimized and enhanced over Broadwell E, but still, I think it's like 8.25 megabytes of L3 cache on the 6-core part, and just over like 16 megabytes, 16 and a half megabytes, I believe, for their high-end 12-core, 24-thread Skylake-x CPU. You can get as much cache on a 6-core, 8-thread part for $200 with a cooler from AMD in their mainstream segment. So AMD really is just knocking around. I mean, they're bitch slapping Intel all the way across the playground, at least in the mainstream market and the high-end desktop and workstation market, in terms of the value on offer, in terms of the the amount of I/O that these platforms are capable of delivering. Meaning, how many USB ports can they have? How many, NVMe devices can they run? How many PCIe Express lanes there are? And again, core and thread count and value for the money. Surely AMD is going to be undercutting Intel, and especially in the high-end desktop and enthusiast workstation space, the people that are buying these boxes are typically buying them to do workloads that run in parallel, that use all those resources. So having 25% more threads available, 32 threads versus 24 threads, and Intel and AMD's highest end parts on that platform should really give AMD the performance crown, which they have not had for a while. In that space. They haven't even played in that space in a long time. But we can get into more of that stuff later on. If you guys want to see more about those CPUs later, let me know. Moving on from the high-end desktop space, I'm just going to touch on the server space real quick. I know it doesn't apply to a lot of you guys, but it does lead into my cross-point opinions. And again, AMD, if you guys have some money lying around, you want to put it in AMD stock, I'd recommend it. Their product portfolio, their product lineup that we have a clear vision of through the second half of 2018 even, looks phenomenal. The server market, their old Optane CPUs, they used to get murdered. I mean, they just didn't have very good IPC and efficiency, etc. Intel has had a lockdown in the server market, and in truth, the entire CPU market for a long time. But this Ryzen architecture really has changed the game for AMD with a 52% increase in IPC. They're right there at the Intel chips, have even better efficiency, and this is another area where Intel is going to be releasing their server platform in a kind of an odd name brand. They're going to have like their bronze, their gold, and their platinum series products with CPUs that'll apparently go up to like 28 cores and 56 threads. Well, AMD, the Naples CPU that they have already announced a long time ago, is going to have again 32 cores, 64 threads, and the Intel platforms max out at quad channel, no, not quad channel, but 6 channel DDR4 support with 24 DIMMs. And let's see here, make sure I'm correct. Yeah, AMD is going to be able to support 8 channel DDR4 support with 32 DIMMs per socket. Now what that means is that there's going to be a 33% advantage in memory bandwidth on AMD's platform because of that 8-channel DDR4 memory support. They're going to be able to get like 170 gigabytes a second. That's good for a graphics card. This is just on the DDR4 that's going to be in these servers, and they're going to be able to address up to 4 terabytes of RAM and a 2-processor Naples server platform from AMD, which is just absolutely bonkers. Now, you take that and you mix it into some of the other math. These big data centers, they use a ton of servers. And when you fill up an entire rack of these servers, whether they're in 1U or 2U configurations, those are just basically kind of slats they stick these server blades into. Everyone talks about in the data center, I talk about data density, storage density, processor density, virtual machine density. How many of these things can you run, and how much computer resources and storage, etc., can you fit into any given unit of space, or an entire rack, or an entire data center for that matter. So AMD has said that they just basically pointed out that you're going to be able to fit a lot more. Let's see where it is here. A lot more CPUs and a lot more RAM using their server platform than you are going to be able to achieve using what Intel has to offer for that server space. So if you were to fill up an entire rack, top to bottom, with Intel, their skylake-sp parts, which are going to be their scalable processors, supposedly for the server market. If you filled up an entire rack, it would have 4,704 cores in an entire rack. That's a hell of a lot of CPUs. You're going to be able to run 5,376 cores in a rack full of AMD Naples CPUs. So a 14% advantage there in terms of CPU core count and obviously in thread count as well. Now in terms of virtual machine density, AMD is saying you're going to see 32 VMs per socket because there's more cores. So basically one virtual machine running on each core. 32 cores versus 28 cores on AMD's top-end parts. Another advantage there in terms of how many VMs you can run on your server. Memory bandwidth, again, you've got 8-channel versus 6-channel. A 33% advantage there to AMD. And, the cost of memory is lower. They're going to be undercutting Intel in terms of price, relative to what Intel is offering. So, AMD they give better value to consumers across the board. And they're also saying that they have enhanced security that really the admin doesn't have to do on an application level, that just works, out of the box in the data center server environment. So that's the last thing I'm going to say about CPUs, is that Intel's getting their friggin' teeth kicked in here. And for the second half of 2017 and early 2018, granted I haven't seen a lot of information on successors to Socket 1151 or the mobile space, but where we can see, the roadmap for Intel going, with skylake-x, competing against, Whitehaven CPUs in the high-performance desktop arena, or, rather talking about Naples and Snowy Owl CPUs from AMD competing against skylake-sp in their kind of, bronze, gold, and silver tiered server markets. They're getting their butts handed to them. Now, I will say, and this is why I wanted to touch on servers last, because it leads into my 3D Crosspoint kind of opinion here real quick. Just to let you guys know, I am a technician. I do this for a living, and it's how I got my eyes so screwed up. But hopefully they're getting better all the time, and I can get back into doing some tech work here really soon. But I have also sold, and I'm also very familiar with data center, tiered storage solutions, NAS, SAN, networking, security appliances, software licensing, you name it, that takes place in the enterprise market. And I'm just going to flat out tell you about it, and if you want to know more, I'll try and do a video on the details of why this is, and I'll give you a few quips about why this is real quick. But 3D Crosspoint technology right now is only relevant for a select few, a very select few enterprise level, data centers right now. The availability of this stuff, it's only being manufactured in 2 layers. So, I think SK Hynix just recently started to produce NAND in 72-layer configurations. Samsung's mass producing 64-layer NAND. So there's just a lot greater data density there. It costs a lot less to produce NAND. And even though 3D Xpoint, 3D Crosspoint, does kind of sit in between system RAM and NAND-based, SSDs, and it is non-volatile, so it can be used as kind of an intermediary, memory/storage solution in a data center, which is great. If you have a website that gets a lot of hits, and your queue depth is piling up, and you want to reduce your queue depth and keep performance high and latency low. If you're running a VDI environment where everyone comes in the morning, turns on 100 machines, and they all ask the server for information at the same time. If you're running a SQL server, something like that, Intel being first to market with Optane, their own brand of 3D Crosspoint technology, and having that available in the server segment, I do think that is an advantage, a quiver in Intel's cap right now in the server segment. I don't think that 3D Crosspoint technology is really relevant to anyone else, not in the mainstream market, not in the high-end desktop enthusiast market. And by the time it becomes relevant, by the time they have manufacturing down where the cost per gigabyte is competitive enough, right now it's like 20 times higher than what NAND is in terms of cost to produce per gigabyte. And the performance that's noticeable to a regular everyday consumer on a personal computer or even a workstation, we don't have the same kind of workloads that really make that memory, I don't want to say a requirement, but to be a large benefit to us. But again, if you're in the data center and you're doing some of those types of things where you're getting a ton of hits to your server at any given time, it is relevant, and it's just that right now it's in such low production. It's only relevant to a very select few clients of Intel right now, even in that server market. So that being said, Intel did not develop this technology on their own. They did it in conjunction with Micron, and Micron is going to be releasing their own 3D XPoint products, which should be compatible with all platforms. All platforms that have PCIe can run XPoint. That's how it interfaces with Intel. It's just a little bit of extra code in the UEFI BIOS and some software and really validation that makes that Optane work right now on the platforms that it works on currently. And Intel is trying to keep that exclusive, as I would too if I were them, because that's really all they've got. But anyway, Micron is going to have their own stuff based on XPoint coming out soon, and they've also apparently licensed not only the ability to use Micron's 3D XPoint memory in third-party products, but they have supposedly also licensed the ability for third parties to manufacture their own XPoint memory storage and use that in their own products as well. So we should see, broader compatibility, broader availability of this new non-volatile storage, memory kind of intermediary between RAM and NAND technology soon enough. Well, when I say soon enough, I mean 6 months to like 2 years, because it's still in its infancy. It took NAND a long time to grow up. Anybody that had a solid-state drive when they first came to market and they used those expensive, not very data-dense chips, they were expensive to get an SSD when they first came out, and then they started to use MLC, multi-level cell technology that can write, more bits per cell. Then now we have, 3D VNAND, which is TLC. They can write even more bits, even though it uses larger block sizes and has some extra wear to it. But anyway, it gets cheaper and cheaper as companies are able to develop new ways of making these storage technologies more and more dense and more affordable to produce. But anyway, guys, I want to ramble on and talk to you guys more about Vega versus Volta. New memory types available for those platforms coming out very soon, but I'm going to let you guys go. If you want to see something else, if you want to see something in detail, let me know what that stuff is down below. I want to bring these videos out for you guys. I could ramble on about any of this stuff forever. So hope you guys found some of this information useful. Let me know your thoughts. If you think I'm crazy, if you think that Optane makes a big difference in the mainstream consumer market, if it makes a big difference in the high-end desktop market today, do you think that Intel's Skylake-x 12-core part will outperform AMD's 16-core Whitehaven CPU? Do you think that the additional L3 cache that's available to all those R9 processors over the substantially less L3 cache on the entire Skylake-x and Kaby-Lake-x CPUs in that high-end desktop space is going to make a difference? Let me know your thoughts on all this stuff, guys. I appreciate your feedback always. I appreciate you tuning in always. And as always, hope you're doing great. Hope you guys are kicking ass and taking names out there and, enjoying your lives. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.